In a move that has sent shockwaves across the globe, President Donald Trump claims to have a path to peace in the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, a path he insists that could be his greatest achievement yet. But this potential breakthrough comes with a staggering price tag: the cession of 20% of Ukrainian territory to Russia and the abandonment of Ukraine's NATO aspirations. These are, of course, the very demands Moscow has made from the onset of the conflict, demands consistently rejected by the former President Biden's administration and widely also condemned across the West. Today, we examine Trump's controversial proposal, the potential ramifications for global stability, and the reactions pouring in from Kyiv, Moscow, and the international community. Now, taking your attention to the ongoing war in Ambazonia, just as we see with Russia and Ukraine, things are not getting better in Ambazonia. We see manipulation, intimidation from colonial administration, and its process is escalating by the day. Ambazonia suffers as leaders in Yaounde worship a portrait of a head of state. We see octogenarian Paul Biya, who is oblivious of the absence of absolute peace and tranquility. The spectacle in Yaounde serves as a painful reminder of a government more concerned with images than lives. During the high-stakes meeting in the White House, dialogue had a place at the table. It was a critical juncture to determine the fate of Ukraine, Russia, and NATO. But what about Ukraine? What about Ambazonia? Is dialogue having a place at the table? As the world watched with bated breath, what's the conclusion? What's the progress made? As we delve into the details, this and many more will be explored in today's Flash News. Good afternoon and welcome. I am Tabitha Akro. Let's begin. The United States President Donald Trump, in a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Monday, says that Washington would help guarantee Ukraine's security as part of any eventual peace deal with Russia, though the scale of support has yet to be defined. Let's take a listen.
The Alaska summit reinforced my belief that while difficult, peace is within reach, and I believe that in a very significant step, President Putin agreed that Russia would accept security guarantees for Ukraine, and this is one of the key points that we need to consider, and we're going to be considering that at the table also, like who will do what, essentially. I'm optimistic that collectively we can reach an agreement that would deter any future aggression against Ukraine, and I actually think there won't be. I think that's even overrated, largely overrated, but we're going to find out. And I think that the European nations are going to take a lot of the burden. We're going to help them, and we're going to make it very secure.
The pledge came during a White House summit with Zelensky and a group of European leaders following Trump's meeting in Alaska on Friday with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Zelensky welcomed the assurance, calling it a major step forward, and said the guarantees could be formalized within 10 days. He also indicated Ukraine was ready to purchase about $90 billion in U.S. weapons. Let's take a listen.
I think that we had very good conversation with President Trump.
Very good.
And it really was the best one, maybe the best one will be in the future. But it was really good. And we spoke about very sensitive points. The first one is security guarantees, and we are very happy with President that all the leaders are here, and the security in Ukraine depends on the United States and on you and on those leaders who are with us.
Right there on your screen, an intense atmosphere. The atmosphere was serene. But then, taking you back to February, we could realize the encounter there contrasted sharply with a fraud in the Oval Office in February. Now, when Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance publicly criticized Zelensky, But then on Monday saw a different tone. Trump greeted him warmly outside the White House before hosting more than 2 hours of talks with European heads of Britain, Germany, France, Italy, Finland, NATO, and the EU. Now, despite the shift in tone, a settlement still appeared distant. Just before the summit, Russia's foreign ministry dismissed the possibility of NATO troops being employed and deployed to secure a peace deal, undercutting Trump's offer. That statement, that was what he did. But then let's take a listen at what President Trump has to say.
We're going to try and get a three-party meeting, maybe as soon as we can. And I have a feeling you and President Putin are going to work something out. Ultimately, this is a decision that can only be made by President Zelensky and by the people of Ukraine working also together in agreement with President Putin. And I just think that's very good things are going to come of it. So I hope we have a good meeting. And if we can have a good meeting, I'll set up a meeting with President Putin. And if you'd like, I'll go to that meeting. And not that I want to do that, but I will do that because we want to save a lot of people from dying. A lot of people are dying, and we got to save them. We got to save it. 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 people sometimes a week. All of us would obviously prefer an immediate ceasefire while we work on a lasting peace, and maybe something like that could happen. As of this moment, it's not happening, but President Zelensky and President Putin can talk a little bit more about that. You know, in the 6 or so wars that we stopped, we haven't had a ceasefire. And so I don't know that it's necessary. You can do it through the war, but it would be, I like the ceasefire from another standpoint. You immediately stop the killing.
President Trump had thought that the ceasefire were to be possible, but then different people have their opinions, even with Emmanuel Macron. But then we see that Trump and Zelensky said they hoped the discussions would pave the way for direct talks with Putin. Trump later revealed he had spoken to the Russian leader and was working to arrange a meeting between Putin and Zelensky, followed by a three-way summit. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said a Putin-Zelensky meeting could take place in Hungary within 2 weeks. The Kremlin has also confirmed to these statements. Let's take a listen.
Everybody around this table is in favor of peace. And we work very hard, and we've worked very hard during the past few years to have a peace.
I think this is extremely helpful that we are meeting and hearing that the two of you are having such a good meeting today here in Washington. The next steps ahead are the more complicated ones now. The path is open. You opened it last Friday. But now the way is open for complicated negotiations. And to be honest, we all would like to see a ceasefire, the latest from the next meeting on. I can't imagine that the next meeting would take place without a ceasefire. So let's work on that, and let's try to put pressure on Russia, because the credibility of these efforts we are undertaking today are depending on at least a ceasefire from the beginning of the serious negotiations from next step on. So I would like to emphasize this aspect and would like to see a ceasefire from the next meeting, which should be a trilateral meeting wherever it takes place.
An opinion right there by the German Chancellor. But the last direct negotiations between Russia and Ukraine were held in Turkey in June. But Putin declined Zelensky's public invitation for face-to-face talks, sending only a low-level delegation. Meanwhile, European leaders urged President Donald Trump to secure a ceasefire before advancing negotiations. Trump, however, shifted his stance after meeting Putin, adopting Moscow's position that any agreement must be comprehensive. He acknowledged a ceasefire would be desirable, but argued talks could continue while fighting persisted. Macron and Merz disagreed, insisting a ceasefire was essential before meaningful progress could be made. Now, we just listened to that of the German Chancellor. It's time to listen to Emmanuel Macron. Let's take a listen.
A robust and long-standing peace. This is why the idea of a trilateral meeting is very important, because this is the only way to fix it. And by the way, I think as a follow-up, we would need probably a quadrilateral meeting, because when we speak about security guarantees, we speak about the whole security of the European continent. And this is why we are all united here with Ukraine on this matter. In order to organize such a trilateral meeting, your idea to ask for a truce or ceasefire, at least to stop the killings, as we discussed, is a necessity. And we all support this idea. And in order to have such a long-standing peace for Ukraine and for the whole continent, we do need the security guarantees. And the first one is clearly a credible Ukrainian army for the years and decades to come. And the second one is our own commitments, all of us. And we worked very hard during the past few months amongst the coalition of the willings, with the support of NATO, to build the different pillars of security guarantees and our commitments. And you can be sure that the Europeans are very lucid about the fact that they have their fair share in these security guarantees for Ukraine, but their own security is clearly at stake in this situation. So you can count on us as we can count on you.
The presence of European leaders in Washington underscored their desire to back Kyiv and also to secure stronger commitment for its defense. They stressed that Ukraine's security was inseparable from that of the wider European continent. However, NATO membership for Ukraine remains off the table, but NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said an Article 5-style security guarantee was under discussion, which could provide Kyiv with collective defense assurances without formal membership. Ukraine's constitution enshrines NATO's accession as a strategic goal, but Trump's team has pressed Zelensky to abandon hopes of joining the alliance or reclaiming Crimea, annexed by Russia in 2014. Now, meanwhile, still on this report, Putin's proposals from the Alaska summit included Ukraine surrendering the quarter of Donetsk still under its control, an offer Zelensky has already dismissed. Any territorial concession would require a referendum under Ukraine's constitution. Let's take a listen.
It's important that both sides are result-oriented, and we see that the president of the U.S. has a very clear idea of what he would like to achieve. He sincerely cares about prosperity of his nation. Still, he understands that Russia has its own national interests. I expect that today's agreements will be the starting point, not only for the solution of the Ukrainian issue, but also will help us bring back business-like and pragmatic relations between Russia and the US. And in the end, I would like to add one more thing. I'd like to remind you that in 2022, during the last contact with the previous administration, I tried to convince my previous American colleague that the situation should not be brought to the point of no return when it would come to hostilities. And I said it quite directly back then that it's a big mistake. Today, when President Trump saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war. And I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that. I think that overall, me and President Trump have built a very good business-like and trustworthy contact. And I have every reason to believe that moving down this path, we can come, and the sooner the better, to the end of the conflict in Ukraine. Thank you.
We see that the Russia and Ukraine war, now entering its fourth year, has killed and wounded more than 1 million people on both sides, including thousands of civilians, and destroyed vast areas of Ukraine. That's a huge number right there. But then we hope that as diplomacy dialogue is on the way, definitely there would be a ceasefire, probably an end to the war. Now, taking you over to the Israel and Hamas ceasefire, we have this development, a breaking report right here. Hamas has finally accepted a 60-day ceasefire proposal mediated by Egypt and Qatar, according to an Egyptian official source. The deal calls for the release of half the hostages held in Gaza in exchange for Israel freeing Palestinian prisoners. Senior Hamas figures confirmed the approval, and other Palestinian factions also signaled support. Israel has not yet formally responded. though an official acknowledged receipt of the proposal. The terms reportedly reflect an earlier plan presented by the U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff, which Israel had previously endorsed. The arrangement would pause Israeli military operations for 2 months and serve as a pathway toward a broader deal to end nearly 2 years of conflict. Now, even as the ceasefire discussions advance, Israel has escalated preparations for an assault on Gaza City. Witnesses reported tanks and bulldozers moving into the Sabra suburb on Monday, while sustained bombardments pushed thousands of civilians west and south. Israeli leaders have also described Gaza City as Hamas' last urban stronghold, but warn that any invasion of risks endangering remaining hostages and dragging the military into prolonged guerrilla warfare. Protests across Israel over the weekend saw tens of thousands demand an agreement to secure the release of the 50 hostages still believed to be in Gaza, of whom only 20 are thought to be alive. Let's take a look. The war's humanitarian impacts remain severe, as you've just seen. Also, local health officials estimate that more than 61,000 Palestinians have been killed since October 2023, and at least 263 people, including 112 children, have died from malnutrition and starvation, with aid groups warning of an unfolding famine. Also, in recent days, nearly 1,000 families fled neighborhoods in eastern Gaza, fearing an imminent ground offensive. Displacement has compounded living conditions in an already devastated enclave where food, water, and medical supplies are scarce. Meanwhile, negotiations resumed in Cairo this week. Qatari Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani met Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and Hamas representatives to advance mediation efforts. Previous rounds of indirect talks collapsed in July amid disputes over hostages, disarmament, and post-war arrangements. Israel insists that a permanent truce requires the release of all hostages, and Hamas disarmament conditions the group continues to reject unless tied to the recognition of a Palestinian state. Key differences also persist over Israeli withdrawal timelines and mechanism for aid distribution. Benjamin Netanyahu keeps making a lot of statements this time. He has made another. Let's take a listen.
Those who are calling today for an end to the war without Hamas's defeat are not only hardening Hamas's position and delaying the release of our hostages, they are also ensuring that the horrors of October 7th will repeat themselves over and over again, and that our sons and daughters will have to fight over and over again in an endless war.
The conflict erupted on October 7, 2023, when Hamas-led militants stormed across the border into southern Israel, killing 1,200 people and also abducting 251 hostages. Israel's Eastern military campaign has devastated Gaza, on the other hand, with about 3/4 of the territory now under Israeli control. The acceptance of a ceasefire proposal by Hamas signals a potential turning point after months of deadlock. Yet, Israel's silence underscores the uncertainty surrounding the deal. With Gaza City bracing for a possible ground assault, humanitarian needs worsening, and regional mediators intensifying efforts, the coming days may undermine, or rather determine, whether the war moves toward de-escalation or a new and deadlier phase. Now, taking you over to Africa, in Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso has declared United Nations Regional Coordinator Carol Fleury smears Nayek persona non grata, citing a UN report that alleged violations against children in the conflict-hit West African country. According to the government authorities, NEDA consulted during the preparation of the report titled Children in Armed Conflict in Burkina Faso. They were not informed of its findings before publication. Officials accused the United Nations of presenting baseless claims and falsehoods without relying on relevant investigations or court rulings. The United Nations said it regretted the decision and reaffirmed its commitment to continue engaging with Burkinabe authorities to support the country and its people. Despite the government's move, the United Nations stressed that its staff members are accorded privileges and immunities to carry out their functions. Fleury smears Nayek, who left the country following the order, was appointed last year. She has more than 2 decades of experience in development, security, humanitarian, and post-conflict work. Burkina Faso has been gripped by worsening violence in recent days linked to Islamist groups allied with Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. The instability, which has spilled over into neighboring countries, has triggered a series of military coups from 2020 to 2023. United Nations has repeatedly condemned killings, abductions, and the recruitment of child soldiers in the Sahel conflict, warning of the grave impact on children. Well, this is what we see on a daily basis. But until we get back your way as the stories develop, this is what we're drawing the curtain on today's Flash News. Remember, we're bringing you untold stories on Undaunted at the top of the hour, 8 p.m. Until then, do have a pleasant day and stay safe.